The Hunger Games. Suzanne Collins writes this series in a direct, high-pressure style that feels fast on the page but clear in the mind. The reading experience is tense, accessible, and very controlled. The world is broad enough to feel memorable, yet the books are written so a first-time reader can stay oriented without studying lore. That matters here because the prequel question sounds bigger than it really is. New readers usually ask whether they should start with the newer book because it sits earlier on the timeline. In practice, the safer rule is simpler. Start with the original trilogy. Read the prequel later. This is not about loyalty to release dates for its own sake. It is about preserving the way the series introduces tone, stakes, and context. The first trilogy was built to be the entry point. The prequel was built for people who already know what the main series feels like. If you remember one thing from this guide, remember that the prequel is optional for starting. The trilogy is not optional. It is the core reading experience. Once that is clear, the decision becomes easy. You are not choosing between two equal doors. You are choosing between the designed front door and a later side door that works best after you already understand the house. The one spoiler-safe rule is publication order for first-time readers. That means The Hunger Games first, then Catching Fire, then Mockingjay, and only then The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. This order works because the series was written to widen your understanding step by step. The prose remains approachable, but the emotional weight and the political texture grow in a very deliberate rhythm. When you follow that rhythm, the books feel clean and confident. When you reverse it, the series can feel oddly shaped from the start. Readers sometimes hear that a prequel should come first because it happens earlier in the fictional timeline. That logic sounds neat, but it ignores how reading actually works. A timeline is not the same thing as an introduction. Good entry points are chosen by design, not by internal chronology. The original first book does the best job of teaching you the tone, the pressure, the pace, and the level of commitment. It gives you a complete sense of whether this world works for you. The prequel is better treated as expansion. It adds perspective after your foundation is already secure. That is why this is the safest beginner rule. It protects clarity, preserves discovery, and lowers the chance that a new reader bounces off the series for the wrong reason. The Hunger Games. As a starting point, this book is unusually efficient. It is fast, readable, and immediately focused on the reader experience rather than on background explanation. For a beginner, that matters more than chronology. A first book should make the series feel graspable within a few chapters. This one does exactly that. It shows the tone of the world, the pressure level of the story, and the emotional seriousness of the series without asking you to decode a lot of setup first. It also gives you the cleanest test of fit. If you respond to the voice, the pace, and the moral tension here, you will know whether continuing makes sense. If you do not, you learned that early and with minimal confusion. Starting with the prequel removes that advantage. Instead of meeting the series through its strongest onboarding book, you begin with a later companion work written for readers who already carry some context. That is why almost every beginner-friendly recommendation should begin here. It is not just the first published book, it is the clearest doorway. For parents choosing for a teen, for adults returning to reading, and for anyone who wants the least risky start, this remains the best first choice by a wide margin. Catching Fire. The second book is where many readers realize the original trilogy is not simply one good premise stretched across multiple volumes. The series becomes broader in pressure and more confident in scope, while still staying easy to follow sentence by sentence. That is one reason the trilogy works so well as a unit. Each book teaches you how to read the next one. The second book raises the intensity without making the reading path harder to understand. It rewards continuity. If a newcomer begins with the prequel, they do not get that escalating rhythm in the intended way. They are stepping into the franchise through a side angle instead of through the central lane. For decision clarity, this matters. Many people are not asking for the most complete order. They are asking for the order with the lowest friction and the strongest chance of finishing. The trilogy first route wins on both points. By the time you reach this second book, you are no longer testing whether the series works. You are already inside its momentum. That is exactly what a good reading order should do. It should remove doubt after book one, not add new uncertainty before you have even started. Mockingjay. The third book completes the original reading arc and gives the trilogy its full shape as a reading experience. Even without discussing plot, it is enough to say that the series was built to be felt as a complete progression across these three books. That is why the prequel belongs after them for most readers. Once you finish the trilogy, you know the tone, the moral atmosphere, and the type of questions the series likes to leave you with. Only then does a prequel become additive rather than distracting. New readers often underestimate how much satisfaction comes from finishing a clearly defined core set before moving into extras. That sense of completion matters. It helps you decide whether you want more from the world, or whether stopping at the trilogy already gave you what you wanted. If you read the prequel first, that decision becomes blurrier. You are not entering a finished three-book arc. You are entering through a book that changes the framing before you have a frame to change. So the safest advice remains simple. Treat the trilogy as the main experience. Reach the end of Mockingjay. Then ask whether you want more context, a different angle, or a later added companion perspective. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. This book is best understood as a context-expanding read, not as the default starting point. It exists in the same universe, but it serves a different function for the reader. The original trilogy introduces the world in a clean, emotionally immediate way. The prequel adds distance, texture, and a different reading posture. That can be interesting once you already care about the series. It is less useful when you are still trying to decide whether the series belongs on your shelf at all. A lot of confusion comes from the word prequel itself. People hear prequel and assume first. In book curation, prequel more often means later reward. It can deepen the experience after the core arc, but it is not automatically the right entry point. This is especially true when a series has one obvious beginner book that was written to do the onboarding. The prequel may be perfectly readable on its own, yet still not be the best first taste. Those are different standards. So when someone asks whether to read this first, the safest spoiler-free answer is no for beginners, maybe for rereaders, and yes, only in very specific cases where the reader already knows they want the broader franchise experience rather than the cleanest first entry. There is one small exception lane, but it is narrower than people think. A reader could start with the prequel first if they already know they are committed to reading everything, if they are unusually tolerant of slower setup, and if they care more about franchise-wide chronology than about the strongest onboarding experience. Even then, I would still call it a specialty route, rather than the safest route. The default recommendation should be built for the average first-time reader, not for the rare completionist on day one. Beginner guides work best when they remove options instead of multiplying them. That is the spirit of this video. You are not trying to build the most technically arguable order. You are trying to build the order that most reliably gets a new reader into the series with confidence. In that test, trilogy first still wins. The prequel first path can be defended in conversation, but it is harder to defend as the standard advice for a channel that wants clarity and reader trust. When guidance is meant for beginners, edge cases should stay in the footnotes. The main path should stay clean. That is why this guide treats prequel first as a niche option, not as a co-equal recommendation. Another reason to avoid the prequel first route is expectation management. First-time readers do not just need the right order, they need the right kind of first experience. A beginning book should make the series feel legible, motivating, and easy to continue. The original trilogy does that because its opening novel is one of the clearest gateways in modern young adult fiction. It does not require franchise loyalty in advance, it earns it. Companion or later added books usually ask for a different mindset. They assume you are curious enough to explore side angles, tonal variations, or background questions. That is a very reasonable ask after the core series. It is a heavier ask before the core series. When readers bounce off a franchise, it is often because they entered through a book that was not optimized for onboarding. Then they conclude that the whole series is not for them. That is a preventable mistake. If your goal is to enjoy the series with the least friction, do not start by testing your patience or your interpretive energy. Start with the book that was designed to pull you forward. Save the franchise expansion mindset for later, after the trilogy has already proved itself. So what should you physically buy or borrow first? Buy or borrow The Hunger Games first. If you like it, continue directly to Catching Fire and then Mockingjay. Only after that should you decide whether the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes sounds appealing. This staged approach is especially useful for cautious readers. It lowers commitment pressure. You do not need to collect everything at once. You only need the first book. That also makes this series easy to recommend to parents, gift buyers, and returning readers. The front-end decision is very simple. One book first. Then continue in order only if the reading experience clicks. For people who already own the prequel because of a movie tie-in or a display table, the answer is still the same. Ownership does not have to determine reading order. A book can wait without losing value. In fact, later placement often increases its value because you reach it with the right expectations. Good reading guides reduce pressure at the point of purchase. They do not demand a full plan before Chapter 1. That is why the trilogy first route remains the most practical recommendation, not just the most defensible one. The most common mistake is treating internal chronology as a beginner rule. That approach sounds organized, but it often creates a colder starting experience. Another common mistake is assuming that newer means more current, and therefore better for a first read. In long-running book franchises, newer often means more contextual, not more welcoming. A third mistake is overcomplicating the choice because the internet enjoys debate. Most readers do not need a debate. They need a confident answer that protects enjoyment. There is also a subtle collector mistake. People buy a full set, see the prequel on the shelf, and feel tempted to begin at the leftmost or earliest historical point. That shelf logic is understandable, but it is not reading logic. Reading logic follows the path that gives you the strongest first experience. If you want to avoid confusion, avoid treating all books in a franchise as equal entry doors. They are not equal. Some are written to begin the relationship, others are written to extend it. Once you start seeing that difference, reading order questions become much easier to answer across almost every series you touch. Final recommendation. For first-time readers, do not read The Hunger Games prequel first. Start with The Hunger Games, continue with Catching Fire, finish with Mockingjay, and then decide whether to read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. That is the safest spoiler-free rule because it preserves the intended entry point, keeps the reading curve smooth, and lets the prequel function as a later reward instead of an early complication. If you are a returning reader, a franchise completionist, or someone who already knows you want every angle of the world, the prequel can absolutely be worth reading. It just does not need to be your first stop. The right beginner advice is not the most exhaustive answer. It is the answer that gives a new reader the best chance of enjoying the series quickly and clearly. Here, that answer is simple and stable. Trilogy first, prequel later. If you want the full Hunger Games order in one clean sequence, including where the prequel fits and what to read next after the trilogy, the long guide on the channel is the next step. Use this video as your decision rule. Use the guide as your easy roadmap.